All right. Well, welcome to Guerrilla Discipleship. My name's Kevin Baker. I get to be your host. I've got an unbelievable guest with me today. You can see, actually, she doesn't have it down in the corner. She's listed as Boscoville United Methodist Church, which is okay. But this is Pastor Grace, and we've known each other for a couple of years. And we're going to tell the story of how we met, what God's been doing. And I'm just excited about you getting to know Pastor Grace because she is awesome. So here's how I'm going to give you my side of how we met. I would love to hear your side of how we met because I don't know that I know some of the details, but I met Pastor Grace out of just a weird situation where our church had found this training, this disciple-making training. We had gone through it. At the same time, I was working with a district superintendent in Texas for something completely different. She had asked me if I would work on something for another project. So that's how I had met this district superintendent. And ended up after our church and staff went through this disciple-making training, this district superintendent called me and asked if I would be willing to meet with her bishop, which at the time was Bishop Mike Lowry, which was also at the time Grace's bishop. And we had about a 3-hour conversation. And this is what I know at the end of that conversation, after talking to the bishop, he said to Leah Hyde Gregory, would you get 10 pastors together that would go through this training? And I want to go through this training with Kevin as well. So we set up a time. And the next thing I knew, there were 35 pastors or 33 pastors or something. I was expecting 10. And Grace was one of those pastors. So Grace, how did the DS or bishop or whoever had contacted you, what did they invite you to? Because I don't even know that I know.
We had a mandatory training that we were all required to attend. And we had to seek a special dispensation if we were not going to be there on a particular day. That's how important they felt this was.
Wow.
So from my end, what happened was that I was just brand new to pastoring. I was put into a church in October 1st of 2019 after finishing licensing school that summer of August, I guess it was. And then COVID hit. And so I got to scramble and, go through that. They had a little support group they did through the summer, but I was having a really rough time, personally. Yeah. But once a month, on the first Sunday of the month, we, on the pastoral prayer, we prayed about the mission of the church. And the mission of the church was to go and make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world through our words and deed. We prayed about that every week.
Wow.
Or every month, once a month. So by the time that I had gotten introduced or invited to the training, I was already scratching my head saying, what in the heck is discipleship? Am I a disciple? How is our discipleship transforming the world? I don't see it. I don't see it anywhere, but I'm dissatisfied. I've got a hunger for this. Right. And so when the offering came to go through this discipleship training, I thought, here it is. I'm going to get answers. Well, I got more questions than answers, but I got, but I began a journey. I'll put it that way. And I had been walking along with another pastor from the Bosqueville area where I serve. And we had been meeting. There's three churches real close to each other. We've been meeting once a week on Zoom. And so I just naturally said, hey, do you want to come with me to this discipleship training? And he said, yeah, because I've been really dissatisfied and I'm thinking about discipleship all the time. And this is hitting at just an opportune moment.
Wow.
So we began through the discipleship training together, and we then processed it during our weekly meeting we had with each other in Zoom. And I think had I not had that, I don't think I would have stuck with it. Like our processing that we were able to do through the training was really good. But one funny story is that during the training, Bishop Lowry was in my Discovery Bible study group, and I was leading that day. And it was a really odd thing it was when we talked about the multiplication through 2 Timothy 2, and we were all drawing our pictures and everybody shared their pictures and things. And I was leading that conversation that day. And here the bishop was in my small group. So
that's amazing.
Yeah,
well,
it was funny.
From my side of things, I remember when the bishop, when Leah asked if I would talk to the bishop. I mean, we were just in the middle of the pandemic. We were, or I think it was just beginning. I can't remember exactly how this all worked, but and we had just gone through the training, and we felt probably, I was blessed to have about 30 people that I could process it out with, but I think I felt like you did. And I kept saying to the bishop, as he was asking me questions, I would say, Bishop, all I can tell you is everything for me is shifted through a training that I just had. And I'm happy to share that training with you, but I don't know how to answer any other questions except I'm still trying to process this out. So anyway, it was sort of, you were the first group of people that we had ever done any training for, because we had just gone through it ourselves. And so it felt to me like, God, what are you doing? I'm trying to figure this out. And you're already trying to get us into doing something that we just, so it was sort of a divine appointment, I think, just the way God brought us all together. And so I want to ask you just a sort of a big question. It's going to be maybe hard to answer because it's such a big question, but you take this question wherever you want. If you could just talk for a minute about what the exposure to disciple-making training, movement training did. I mean, what were the impacts? What were the confusing things? What were the good, the bad, whatever, however you want to talk about it, just 30,000 feet. That's that 8-week time that we spent together. What happened? What was the impact? What was it doing?
I would say, and I was thinking of something that actually just happened last week that was good, but I'll go back to the training. So
okay.
In the training, as we talked about the various concepts, for me, they were causing earthquakes inside, like just platonic, shifts in my thinking. And I remember beginning from the place of what, I don't really know what a disciple is. In fact, I think I badgered you about that for quite a while. What is your definition of a disciple, and how do you define a disciple, and how do you know you have one, and what is one? So I was really wrestling with that. And then I remember at one point when I went from I am a disciple to I'm a disciple maker. I want to, now my heart's desire is to replicate and to be a disciple maker and to maybe even plant churches. And that was never part of my, part of my vision or identity. So I would say that there were a lot of identity shifts. And then, honestly, I just began to see that I didn't love well, and that receive love well. And as when we did one of the topics was on the most important commandment, which was love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And I just began to see that I was much more about professionalism and programs and processes than I was about really loving people. And so that's been a shift that's been ongoing as, as I've just prayed through, what does that mean? And what does it mean to love people, to let go of yourself and to let the Spirit, transform you. Yeah.
Man, I love that. That was awesome. You mentioned identity shifts. I felt the same thing when I went through the training. But what I want to say about that is when I first met you, your name was Barbara.
Yeah.
And so would you just say a word about that? Why you changed your name?
Sure. Well, in February of 21, I was just journaling and praying one day, and I just clearly heard the Lord say, I want to change your name. And I was like, really? And like, I'm over 50. That really? And
Yeah.
and the Lord said, yeah. And so I never fully trust that when I hear something, it's for sure God. So
Right.
I like to have a couple of confirmations from other places. So I was preparing a sermon and I was looking at this book by Henry Nouwen. And as I finished the chapter that was for the sermon preparation, when I turned the page, the next chapter was, God wants to change your name.
Oh, wow. Isn't that amazing?
So obviously I read that chapter, and it said that, he was talking about how when God changes your name, it's usually twofold. It has to do with reflecting work that he's begun to do in you already. And it's about your future purpose and ministry. And if you look back at, like, I think the classic example is Jacob, who became Israel, right?
Right.
And when God changed his name, it reflected, the kind of the brokenness he had to come to before he could turn away from being a trickster and then become who God had him to be. And so I began to just ask God, well, I had kind of two names that were going around in my head. One was Grace and one was Faith. And I kind of didn't know, which one God, because I'd seen both of those dramatically in my life, especially through the discipleship training. So one night we're out at a bar having dinner with another couple, a bar restaurant, thing. And at the table behind me, this guy says, "Hey, Grace." And I turn around and look at him. And I said to myself, I didn't do that in front of the restaurant, but internally I did this, right?
Yeah.
And I said, God has already changed my name, because you don't turn around when it's not your name.
Right.
Like if somebody calls a name in a room and it's not yours, you don't pay any attention to it. But when it's your name, you turn around, you look, see who's calling you, right? And it turned out that our waitress's name that night was Grace.
Wow.
And he was calling her, but I turned around.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it really was. And so then I just began to ask the question, Lord, do you want me to make this an official change or just kind of a nickname? And I really had the sense that if I didn't change it legally, that I would forget the learning and I would revert back, and people wouldn't take seriously calling me Grace. So now, every time someone calls me Grace, it reminds me of that moment where God worked and is making me a person of grace versus the person of judgment that I used to be. So
wow, that is so good. So I just have to ask, this is just my curiosity. What did your husband think when you said, "Hey, I'm changing my name"?
I have a funny story about that too. So he, through this discipleship training and the journey, this discipleship journey that I'm now on, I've made some significant changes and improvements in the way I interact with him and how I love him and how kind I am to him. And at work, we were doing, we had an issue come up, and I just kind of had a knee-jerk response to it. And one of my coworkers was happening to have a conversation with Charlie and telling him about this. And this is about maybe 6 months or so after I had changed my name. And his first response was, he goes, "Oh no, that wasn't Grace. That was Barbara who said that."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so I would say over half the time now, he'll call me Grace. Sometimes I won't answer if he calls me Barbara, because I'm trying to get him.
Do you
in
think
the habit of
is he calling
Grace.
you
But
Barbara, saying, "Hey,
there was a little pushback, and he do it. No, it just slips out. He'll say to me sometimes, I didn't marry Barbara. I didn't marry Grace. I married Barbara. So
Right.
like now I've got two wives, or something like that. He's funny about that, but he does, he more and more, he'll use Grace. So
That is awesome.
but I
love
have
that
grace
story.
for him. If he doesn't call me Grace and he calls me Barbara, it's fine with me. I just go on, I have grace for him.
That's awesome. I love that. Thank you for being a part of Guerrilla Discipleship today. I am so glad that you were able to get to know my friend, Pastor Grace, a little bit more. Our conversation will continue the next few weeks as we look at how life has changed once she experienced disciple-making movement training. I know you're going to enjoy it, and I'll see you next week.